Welcome to Lecture 2.1a, the first in our series of 3 on the interactions of heredity and the environment. This lecture is based on the College Board course description for AP Psychology version 1. This is also the first lecture in our series on the biological basis of behavior. My name is Chris Skull, and I wrote this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the interactions of the environment, heredity, and evolution in shaping your behavior. So without further ado, let's dig in. So, according to the College Board, by the end of this lecture, you should be able to discuss psychology's abiding interest in how heredity, the environment, and evolution work together to shape behavior. To do this, we'll start by defining our terms, and then we'll talk about how they work together, and end by a quick talk about how psychologists are able to pull apart these tightly woven threads. And it's worth noting that we'll revisit that idea of how psychologists do that in further lectures in the course, just not this one. Okay. So some quick definitions just to start us off. Obviously, these are not clinical definitions, and you should absolutely have better definitions on your flashcards just to be clear. These are the quick definitions, okay? Heredity is what's in your DNA. That is to say, what you've inherited from your parents. It includes everything from your phenotypical traits, eye color, hair color, height, etc., to your genotype, the literal DNA, including the recessive traits that may not show up in how you look. The environment is really what's going on around you. That is to say, the way that you were raised, the people you choose to surround yourself. It's really all that stuff around you. So it's not just the natural environment like it might be in say, a biology class, but it's also that built environment. Okay. Evolution are those historical events, large and small, that have influenced your genetics across time. Everything from that caveman who died from eating the wrong mushrooms and thus did not live to pass on his DNA, to that great-grandparent of yours who had 10 kids who all survived to adulthood and thus did a great job of passing their genes on to future generations. Okay? It's that gradual change in things across time that happens via natural selection. Behavior is literally how you act and the choices you make. Put them all together, and what have you got? You, that delightful mix of predictable and unpredictable behavior that is yourself. It's also what makes you both the same as those around you and completely different. Okay, so when evolutionary psychologists do research, what they're really looking at is the answer to this question of why you do what you do, and they've got a real specific approach to it. Okay, specifically, they're looking at the role of natural selection in encouraging you to behave in certain ways, for lack of a better term, right? Natural selection is the mechanism by which certain traits get passed down through the generations, specifically those traits that allow you to live longer and to reproduce better. The tendency to prefer sweet foods to bitter foods, for example, is determined by natural selection. Sweet foods typically have more calories, and bitter foods are more likely to be poisonous. In both cases, they encourage you to live longer. Right? Preferences for males who are of higher social status is also naturally selected. They're more likely to be a supportive parent to children or to have the resources to help raise children. Those are examples of natural selection. Even for behaviors that we are genetically predisposed to do, however, the environment can overwrite those predispositions. So, for instance, males sleeping around with several females and females wanting to settle down with a single male. And yet, we live in a time period where the expectation in many societies is that both men and women engage in either monogamous relationships for life or in serial monogamy, which is to say they might have multiple relationships across their lifespan, but only one sexual partner at a time. We have a naturally selected predisposition to eat food, but some people will choose to go on a hunger strike, even to the death, to protest social conditions that they don't like. But for most behaviors are some selection of the environment and of genetics, okay, and of that heredity and evolution, okay? And the specifics will vary from place to place, right? So for example, having kids is something that is the whole goal of natural selection. It's how we pass on our genes after all. But who we find attractive will vary from culture to culture and is typically associated with who we associate with higher status. So in some countries, people are attracted to women who are heavy set. This is an indication of wealth and the ability to provide food or to have access to food, particularly in poorer countries. In the United States, we tend to value women who are thin and blonde, right? And men who are dark-haired and muscular. Wealthy men attract far more women than poor men do, same thing for women. And in both cases, right, what we're looking at again is that idea of higher status. Okay, but be careful what you wish for. However, wealthy people can have a lot of trouble deciding why people want to be with them or hang out with them, whether it's because they like the wealthy person as a person or because they like the wealth of the person. So it's tricky. Okay. Psychologists use twin studies to pull apart these tightly woven threads and figure out what is heredity and what is environment. Twin studies look at the differences in identical twins, both identical twins raised together and identical twins raised apart, which allows them to determine what the impact of the environment is, since identical twins have identical DNA. We'll talk more about that as we go through the course, however. Again, we'll run into that in some of our later units. If you successfully understood this lecture, then you can explain what heredity is, what evolution is, and what we mean when we are talking about both behavior and the environment, and that you can provide examples of the ways that those things interact to make you who you are. We'll continue exploring these ideas over the course of the class as we examine various aspects of our psychology. As always, if you're struggling with the basic concepts in the lecture, go back and rewatch all or part of the video. Then if you still have questions, bring them into class and I'd be delighted to address them. Until the next time I see you, be well, my friends.